What's poppin', everybody? My name is G, watching Keeping This Tech. Today's video, very exciting video. I've been wanting to do it for a while. We're talking about the A7R Mark V for video. Now, if you're like me and you wanted to get the most from this camera for video, hopefully this will help you out. I will say that I've had this camera for 2 years, and in the beginning of the year, I would say January to about the middle of April, I used this camera only for video work, and that allowed me to understand a lot of the strengths of this camera and also its weaknesses. So we're going to talk about 3 things to get the most from the A7R Mark V in terms of video. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to jump right into it. First of all, I want to mention that if the A7S III is considered the low light monster, right, then the A7R Mark V is afraid of the dark. So what do I mean by that? We're dealing with 61 megapixels, right, on the photo side, which translates to about, I think, a little over 9K or maybe 9K for video. We're going to get into the Ks in a bit for video, but hang on with me for a second. You got 60 of those megapixels in the same surface area that any other camera would have, maybe 33 or 24, or in the case of the A7S III, only 12. And if we go down to that extreme, those 12 megapixels are huge in there, right? Because it has to fill up that same area. So you're gonna let a lot of light in. But if you go back to where we are with the A7R Mark V at 61, all of those light buckets, those megapixels, have to be super small. And so they're not gathering as much light as, say, a camera that has 33 or 24 megapixels would, right? I mean, that all kind of makes sense. And so that means you really have to flood the sensor with light on the A7R Mark V. And that's actually not a bad thing at all. In fact, I actually appreciate that because it makes me have to think like a filmmaker when I'm shooting with the A7R Mark V. Give this sensor as much light as possible without clipping, right? And obviously you need to make it make sense for your scene. But that would be the first one, is to just flood the sensor with light, and you're on your way. Now, hear me out. We talked about 61 megapixels on the photo side. Now let's get back to that 9K on the video side. See, you need to think about this camera as an APS-C video camera, and that's gonna actually be my second point. So 9K is probably like that native resolution, but this camera shoots up to 8K 24 frames a second. For the purposes of this video, I'm not really gonna dive into why 8K is not great, but just know that most of us live in 4K, and so that's where I'm taking this. To get from 8K to 4K, that can happen one of 2 ways, and this camera actually does it both ways. And so I'm going to break that down as well. You can line skip and pixel bin, or you can oversample. So in its full frame mode, you're getting that pixel binning, that line skipping, and it literally is just skipping each other line or every other line to get you that image. Now the camera will kind of fill in the blanks, and it can create this artifact called moire. Now, moire to me is super distracting. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it happens, you know, there's nothing you can do about it to get rid of it in post. It's like this shimmery, like fingerprint pattern that's all over your clothes or furniture, and it becomes really distracting. Now, I will say that I was expecting to see moire with like fine lines and patterns like plaid or something like that, but it'll even happen with a solid shirt like this. Now, it doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's a problem. Now, that's in full frame. I will point out too, Chris Burkhart did a video, shout out to Chris. I don't know him, I think he's a great creator, but he did a video where he was talking about his experience with the A7R Mark V. And in that video, he said that,
and shooting 4K 24 with this is actually an oversampled 6.2K image.
I'm like, is that true? I realized that I had not been shooting in 24 frames a second at all since I've owned this camera. And then I did a couple of tests, and unfortunately I still see moire. And moire is a telltale sign that a camera is not oversampling, because oversampling will absolutely get rid of that. When this camera oversamples, it's doing it in APS-C mode or Super 35 mode. And that's as simple as a setting switch, right? You just go ahead and activate Super 35 mode, and the camera will punch in 1.5 times. You can also put APS-C lenses on here, which Sony has a bunch of dope APS-C lenses for video. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, they came out with the FX30, the A6700. There's a ZVE10-2 now. So there's a bunch of lenses that kind of support that APS-C crop that you can go ahead and throw on here to give you the best video. Now, I will recommend, you know, those low aperture lenses. If you're talking about APS-C lenses like 1.4s, you know, 1.8s, you want to stay away from like the f4s, because once you do all of the math, you know, that aperture and the depth of field is like f8, f7. It's not really even worth it at that point. But yes, think of this as an APS-C camera and give this as much light as possible, and you are well on your way. Third thing I'm gonna talk about is picture profile. You know, there's S-Cinetone, there's the just no picture profile, but to get the best quality from this camera, you want to shoot an S-Log3. S-Log3 is going to give you the most dynamic range. It's going to give you the most accurate color detail, and believe it or not, it's going to give you the best noise performance. So if you've lit up your scene the right way and you've exposed correctly, you're going to have very small amounts of noise in your footage. It's going to be super clean. Now hopefully this video is a demonstration of how, you know, clean S-Log footage can look on the A7R Mark V, because I'm filming this whole talking head portion on the A7R Mark V right now. Bonus tip here, if we're talking about S-Log3, is you want to stay as close as you can to the native ISO, if not be on that. You have two ISOs that are going to be your base ISO for S-Log, which is 800 and 25. And the way to think of it is 800 for when you're outdoors and you've got a bunch of light, and then 2500 when you're indoors and you're in low light situations. And before I hop off the video, I actually want to point out just a couple of things. Because I shoot real estate, I'm shooting in 4K 60 a lot. You know, APS-C mode does not allow for 4K 60. So just know that going into this camera, if that's something that you're really into, you're gonna have to shoot in that full frame mode. Also, there's a number of different crops that happen depending on the modes that you're shooting in. So a recommendation there would be, if you're used to shooting with primes, then maybe think about getting like a zoom, a 2.8 zoom, to kind of compensate for all of those crops, right? In some cases, those crops actually help out. Like, so for instance, I'm shooting with a 35mm lens right now in full frame mode, with hopes that it'll show some of that moire. But if I wanted to shoot in APS-C mode, I could use my 20mm G lens. And because of all of the crops, I can get all the way up to 36mm. It's crazy, but it's absolutely true. You know, you could use the crops to your advantage, or you could figure out a way to work around it if it's not going to work for you that way. I appreciate you guys watching the video. I'll check you guys out in the next one. Peace.